Welcome to the Honest Designers Show, your transparent look into life as a modern designer. My name's Tom Ross and I'm the founder at designcuts.com, and this week I'm joined by my fellow Brit and hand lettering expert Ian Barnard, American retro design expert Dustin Lee, and the incredibly talented South African illustrator Lisa Glans. This week, we're thrilled to welcome Aiden Fishbein to the show. Aidan runs Vitals Agency and is a seasoned creative entrepreneur and film editor. Aidan is obsessed with proper project planning and organization, which is something your four hosts definitely need some help with. So, without further ado, let's get into the show. Aidan, welcome, man. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is a special treat.
We're excited to have you on. As I covered in the intro, I don't think that the four of us that host this show are necessarily the most organized people. Would you say, guys? Is that a fair assumption?
Speak for yourself, Tom.
Fair assumption?
No, very fair.
I'm a master at it.
Yeah, you're the worst, Dustin.
It's true. It's crazy that I actually can keep this business going.
So
Good spacing on the walls between your pictures, though. Definitely.
yeah, you got some innate organization going on.
Measured it.
So hopefully not only is this going to be a super useful episode for the listeners at home, but I hope the four of us are going to take some stuff away from this because God knows we need it. So Aidan, I would love if you could give like a little bit of background about kind of what it is you do, but especially your organizational brain, because I think the same way people feel somewhat of a disconnect between creativity and marketing. And we talked about this on the show a lot, you know, marketing's a dirty word and it can feel kind of alien to creatives. I think the same can be said of organization for a lot of people, because I guess we're used to thinking pretty laterally as creatives and just this kind of random brainstorming and the spontaneity. How do you marry that with organization?
Well, you're totally right. First of all, I mean, there's, I would say specifically more so for creative types, we just resist boxes, right? Most of us have made our livelihood by breaking them and thinking outside of them and totally being countercultural and counterintuitive and being weird, right? But what I think most of us don't do, and I'll speak for myself, very rarely do I ever get a really good kind of idea of how big the box is before I decide to break it. And through my journey, this is kind of my philosophy, is that before I talk about breaking the rules, before I talk about thinking outside of the box, it's really important to figure out what the constraints are, because often there's a lot more room to play and frolic inside those constraints than I thought. And it's not actually that constrictive. And when I think along the lines of a model that is already proven inside a box, and be creative along those lines, it's duplicatable, it's predictable, and I can actually run with that. Whereas if I was just unbridled and creative, I may get far enough, but I may not know where to go next time because I'm in uncertain territory at every step. So that's kind of the philosophy, and that was birthed from pain, as most of my beliefs are, where I for some reason am really attractive, like number two for a lot of like crazy atmospheric thinkers, and as a result of being that number two for so many crazy, sometimes super successful, sometimes like dismal crash and burn failures, I got a lot of time to see what happens when you don't reverse engineer, when you don't plan, when you don't organize. So not only having that tendency kind of internally, but then a lot of experience of kind of do as we say, not as we do kind of people. It just cemented and reinforced it over and over and over.
I think it's a great marriage as well when you get those two complementary characters, right? Because I've known people like that. And to be honest, I tend to be slightly more on the crazy side. In terms of I just want to go and do and like try everything and create and be disruptive. And so I tend to work very well with people that are more organizational and structured because they bring me back down to earth and keep me like
Sure.
on track. You touched on some kind of, bad experiences and horror stories. Like, what are some examples or where it goes horribly wrong? How bad can that get?
So, any of you guys filmmakers out there? I've been on big productions, photo productions, things like that.
No, only like very minor for a hobby kind of thing. And even that,
Sure.
like when you try and scale that to like some amateur actors and be a director, even that falls apart pretty quick.
Well, your birthday video is pretty good.
I must see this. So on production sets, there's this term that gets thrown around like way more loosely than I would prefer. And the term is, we'll fix it in post, right? And it's usually a joke. It's usually, we didn't move the jar that the actor moved in the previous scene, so now there's a continuity error. Or, whoops, now we're going to have to shoot day for night. We'll fix it in post. So it's this idea that we're just going to put off the solution because we didn't prepare properly, right? And so there was a lot of experience with me. I worked with a really famous automotive photographer for a long time. Brilliant guy. And more or less every shoot was just highly stressful because there wasn't a lot of pre-production, a lot of planning. But every so often, it would just explode. So there was we were working with a large brand that had a celebrity kind of spokesperson, and this was when I was like really new and I didn't really know much of what to do. And I also wasn't trained very well. So I fancy myself a learner while doer, but even then my job was to hold the beauty fan, right? So the fan that blows the model's hair and makes them pretty. And it didn't occur to me to turn the fan off between shots. So, and it's a very simple thing that most production and most preparation is very, very simple. And this is a great example of somebody literally just taking 2 seconds to say to me, turn the fan off, to redirect it away so that the model doesn't like freak out and come over and kick me, which is exactly what happened. And this was a celebrity model. I'm not sure if I can tell you who it is, but that was like the most terrifying. They stormed off set. The production was delayed. And whenever a production is delayed with 10, 20 people on set, it's a lot of money that's wasted. So it is one of those things. It's time, it's money. And, I learned from that experience how to hold a fan. And, what didn't happen is my director didn't learn that was something to do next time, to be a little bit more prepared. So that was the beginning of that cycle. And similar experiences, more worse or less impactful, happened over the course of the next couple of years. But it was always the same thing. There were always little things that could easily have been done beforehand that weren't, and resulted in semi-disasters each time.
So how do you go about planning? Because I know when stuff goes wrong, it's like hindsight's a wonderful thing, right? And
right.
And often you feel like you couldn't have foreseen them. And I guess you're saying you can, but how?
It's a great question. Well, my agency's developed a postmortem process. It's not that much different than standard postmortem processes for many agencies, but it's just a simple thing. It's a simple process. We have a worksheet. We kind of rally together, whoever was involved in the project, and go through a series of questions at the end of a project. It can be as simple as what went well, precisely, and what didn't go well, precisely. What would we do differently next time to try and avoid those kinds of things? Now, our worksheets are incredibly detailed. And so they go all the way into the depths of like, okay, the buy-in from the decision makers, was that secured beforehand? Because a lot of the time with clients, you go 3 rounds of revision before the real decision maker gives input, and then you wish you had that on round 1, right? So a postmortem process after that project identifies the pain and gives us a roadmap of things to do better next time and avoid the following time. And then that's just an iterative process. So the next time we start a project, we just all make sure we read the postmortem document from the previous project. Like, okay, these are the things to watch out for. Here are the red flags. It's not a perfect process, but it's definitely better than nothing. And it enables you to continue to iterate.
I'll give you a great example of that, actually. So I know we were slightly headless chicken when you first joined us on this call, because we just jumped off a 2-hour webinar, Ian and I, and we're trying to catch our breath. But when you, were signed up to be on this show, you got like an automated thing confirming your time. It gave you a link to a guide on like how to set up your audio, let you know the link to appear on. None of that used to happen. So it used to be that we jump on the call, we'd be like, oh no, I forgot we've got a guest. Who is it? Okay, let's email them a link because they're expecting that. They're emailing me in the meantime, being like, where do I meet you guys? Like, I've got no heads up about this. They jump on and we're like, oh, have you got Audition? Which is what we use to record. They download it on the call, and we'd have to talk them through how to do it. And so the process might not be perfect just yet, but it's so much better than it used to be. And you think of like the time wasted, how unprofessional it makes you look as a brand or an organization or anything. The stress, all of that. And if you're doing that every single week and you're never learning from it, it compounds. That becomes a lot of time and a lot of stress.
I think that's the crazy part is, okay, so I've been running Retro Supply for around 6 years now. And like to this day, I mean, things pop up and I think, I can't believe we didn't do that in year one. Like, for instance, I think it took years before the idea occurred to me to make templates out of instructional and guide sheets that go into every single product. Right. Years. You guys, this is so obvious.
Because you'd make them from scratch each time.
Each time you make them from scratch, and like you throw things in, so the wording would be slightly different. The consistency wouldn't be the same. We eventually had to go through and we did everything and made it all uniform. But it's almost like as a creative, sometimes, you focus on the bigger picture and all the little stuff is so boring that you just think you'll do it later. But deep inside, you'll never do it later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, common.
And I used to really shy away from this stuff because I'm not naturally very organized or process driven, but I have to learn it because our business suffers. So I do it because I have to. I think you're obviously a bit more of a natural, Aidan. And the way I look at it and deal with this with our team is I look at it in terms of being reactive or proactive. So if you're reactive, it would be something like an issue keeps occurring and you keep like doing a great job of dealing with that issue as it comes in. Being proactive is avoid the issue happening in the first place. And we keep implementing stuff like that. And I'll be like, wow, we just saved an hour a day through like a small tweak, and we're going to keep saving that hour a day for the rest of time. And it's crazy when you keep implementing those fixes and improvements, how much it adds up.
Yeah. I have a question though, because I think maybe Ian will also agree with me. It's because my job can be so diverse, from a bit of client work, a bit of product creation, customer service, and personal work that you want to maybe pursue or whatever. There's so many different angles and each thing has its own personality and set of challenges. How do you identify the things that you need to actually preempt or work through? Or I guess what I'm saying, because they're not so common like an everyday occurrence, it's quite difficult to identify sometimes. I mean, you only might come across it like once every 3 months,
right?
And by the time that 3 months comes up, you're like, man, why didn't I sort this out last time? And now I'm doing it again, and and then you just don't have the time to fix it, so you let it go, kind of thing. I mean, it's difficult to, I don't know. How do you figure that out?
It's just as simple as those things get fixed slower, because it really does for me boil down to how many occurrences of pain has there been, and usually the more pain, the faster something gets fixed. So if one way to look at postmortems is really just a way to kind of like harness and sit in the pain. Unfortunately. And then when you have little wins, because it's just as good to kind of resonate with the wins. So for example, a year goes by and you realize there's this thing that you should do every single time you start a project that you've never done. And then you do it. You finally institute something like this link, right? Like what was like 5 steps with screenshots about how to set up your float, your bit depth, and your sample rate in an Audition. You put that together. And then the next time you do a postmortem after you've done a project like that, you say to yourself, look at that. That was amazing. We had this finally instituted. So it's a carrot and a stick thing. The pain is usually what motivates the change. And then the reassurance and the carrot and the blessing of that next thing going super well is usually what kind of reinforces that. But unfortunately, there's no way to, for me at least, that I've found, to intellectualize solutions. There are smarter people than me out there. There are more disciplined and dedicated people that fix it because they know it's a good idea. I usually have to bang my head against it for a while.
Can I dig deeper into that question? I have a question on top of that question for you.
Meta question.
So occasionally I have my moments where, you know, someone like yourself inspires me and I'll start to implement a system, or the system is set up well and it's very clear how to do it. And I'm like, okay, we'll start doing this. So perfect example. I'm a really big fan of a guy named Nick Disbato, I believe his name is, runs Draft. It's designed to increase conversion and whatnot. And he's very good at it. And like, for instance, one of his very simple rules is twice a week, check these certain relevant Google Analytics statistics to see what has happened since you've implemented these changes. Has it been positive? Has it been negative? That's great. Totally agree. Obviously, it's smart. The problem is that I have all sorts of people like that I respect, that I know the advice is sound, and they're saying, implement this too. And they'll even give you the plan. You don't even have to write it out in a lot of cases. Right. And what you end up with is just like not a hodgepodge, but just a large library of things with execution notes. And being a small business, I have, 3 to 4 people working with me. A lot of people listening, I'm sure, have just themselves. How do you trigger yourself to remember to do these things? And how do you choose the important ones? Because it would be easy to have so many triggers, even if you put it into a calendar going off, that you'd actually never do anything except for check off things on lists.
And just before you jump in, Aidan, to layer on top of that, I guess what Dustin is saying is it can be kind of easier to know what to do. The difficulty is in doing it. Right now, I could sit in this room for the whole night and probably write a list of 5,000 things, small and big, that I know are going to help my business. But doing them and the reality of it, and to be honest, this is why I hate like the memes on Instagram and all these types of things where it's like, just implement this framework and everything's going to be great. And it's like, well, try doing that in the real world where people get sick and we're not robots. We have inefficiencies and we forget stuff and we're human beings. How do you marry the two?
So this is a little, I'm going to come at this sideways. So you already kind of noticed, I don't know you guys super well, but you've already noticed that I think a little bit differently than you guys. The answer that I'm prescribing is not how to turn into me. You guys think differently. You guys have different strengths. And I'm of the belief that you will always get more of a kind of an exponential return if you play to your strengths rather than mitigate your weaknesses. So when I was talking about kind of the attractiveness of me being for the visionary, I started digging into this, and it turns out there's a lot of writing on the subject. There are, you guys familiar with Simon Sinek, Start With Why? Yeah. So Simon has the why and the how person breakdown. There is also the integrator and the visionary relationship. But fundamentally, there are 2 roles in a leadership level of most companies that the really, really, truly great companies, you'll notice that there's 2 people, right? There's the creative, atmospheric visionary. And then there is an integrator, which is like the person that gets the things done, that institutes processes, that takes the vision and actually makes it happen. So that's not kind of permission to not get good at stuff. There's always reason to get better and to develop your process and to keep that list, dusting somewhere, so like if you got time and you have motivation, you can pull one of those things out. But at the same time, it's kind of like, how can I find somebody that gives me the yin to that yang, right? So, the pain is helpful to better your process. It is always nice to try and transform yourself a little bit because there are a lot of great ideas out there. But if it really does come down to it, and it's something that actually would take more time for you to change in yourself than it would just to hire somebody and find somebody that is the integrator, the doer, the person that can take your vision, understand that it's a great idea and roll it out for you. Don't not look at that too, obviously some of us don't have that option. We do need to do everything ourselves. But they call these like relationships rocket fuel. because it's like what gets the things off the launch pad, but it's also the reason that rocket ships explode too, because these people don't typically get along, but they're super valuable to each other, you know? So that kind of didn't answer your question, but I don't know. What do you think?
It's got my mind racing, because I know if we hired like an operations director, we would become...
Often it's an operations person, yeah.
Yeah, we'd become unbelievably efficient, and I'd probably enjoy it more because I could go and have all the crazy ideas and that type of strategy. Yeah.
I can agree with that too. I have fantastic person that I worked with for years, named Suzanne, and she's very much more that analytical person than me. So she'll be the one to look through something before we launch it, say, and be like, well, we should do this and that. And what about this didn't work last time? What about doing that again? Or we need to organize these files. I can't believe the Dropbox is like this. That's crazy. Are you out of your mind? And she does help a lot with that. Maybe it's just a sign of just how chaotic things are that I feel like I need about 3 more of her.
Well, and you're probably not wrong. I mean, your capabilities would be force multiplied by powers, by exponents, if you had 1 more of her, right? Because for every 1 integrator or 1 HAL person, I have more, and I have kind of a little dual thing, but I will always have more ideas than time to execute, even as an analytical person myself. So for you guys, I'm sure that's true too. You know, your ideas runneth over. And if you had people to execute, man, the world would not know what to do. So, yeah.
I've got a question. So say it's just you.
Right.
You can't employ anyone else. How do you decide whether to invest in leveling up your skills in a certain area if you don't know whether you're good or not in that area?
That's a great question. There's so one of the rocket fuel book that I mentioned with the integrator and the visionary, they offer like an assessment that you can take to figure out where on the spectrum you are, like visionary or what they call integrator. I'd start there, but then I guess, you know, I would turn back and say, you don't have a choice but to take out your own garbage, you know, do the things that you're not naturally skilled at or not naturally interested in doing. And then above all, be very, very aware when the pain happens, because it will be your best friend, you know, and that's the thing that changes people that don't want to be changed.
Aiden, I learn best from examples. Could we create some sort of example where one lucky volunteer here could create a scenario and maybe you could show how that might look?
Sure. Lay it on me.
You've just put your hand up, really, Justin.
Yeah, I know. Go for it, man.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't. I don't have anything planned. I thought maybe someone else had something.
Okay, I'd love an example because I always want it to be relevant for the listeners as much as possible. Sure. So how about something that's client facing? Because we get a lot of people that are having client work, they're freelancers, or they're trying to land more client work. What about the process of onboarding a new client?
Beautiful. So, and we actually, that was one of the most recent things that we documented in writing. But with client onboarding, what that really looks like to me is the only way that you can document a client onboarding flow is more of a niche question than anything. So the first question that what we do is we first try to say, okay, how does our onboarding process look like? And it's all the way from the sale. So as soon as the sale closes, we draft our letter of intent. We usually get that signed right away. We then invoice. We then draft up the proper contract. A contract is signed when the invoice is paid. We make sure we have kind of a pre-huddle meeting with all the people that are on our team, kind of briefing them on the project. We then bring those people to the client, have another conversation. So the process, the first step would be try to write down your process as best you can. What will probably happen is you'll realize that there's a different process for each kind of client. And you'll realize that some of your onboarding processes are more detailed than other ones because you've probably worked with more of one kind of client than another. So I would challenge folks in this situation to get really clear on, and this is an important process because as soon as you realize that there are 5 steps in this process and they're really clear defined, and there's 20 steps in this process and they're not very well defined, it's really easy to look at that and say, you know what? These are the kinds of clients I prefer serving. The relationships usually come off. They start well, they happen well, and they finish well. They're shorter, they're more profitable. So I would be asking myself these questions the entire time I'm drafting the onboarding. And that kind of helps you re-niche from time to time. So that's the way we've done it. And we were able to say, we don't take on we don't take on 5+ page web development jobs anymore because of that. We barely do landing page design anymore. Web is just, there's too many steps. They're all super, super uncertain. And we've whittled down to, branding, identity, design, film production as a result of documenting our onboarding process and refining our niche.
So you found those things to be most profitable and often shorter time.
Exactly. And that was after having done the onboarding process through the way we documented it a handful of times and then reflecting on it each and every time we'd done that onboard. So
I guess you looked at some of the areas that you discounted and stopped doing, and it was a case of, did you try and improve them initially and then found that couldn't really be done? So they were already like as efficient as they could be, and unfortunately they were just less efficient than some of the ones you kept.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So just to be really, really specific with the example, we were looking at identity and print design and branding services versus 5+ page web design. And these were the two things that most people came to us for. So we took a stab at just documenting the onboarding process. And had that first realization that like, oh, wow, this one's really clear. We know all the steps from this to like final delivery of products. And this one had so many permutations. Like if this happens, then that fork starts, and then this fork starts, and then, the branches of the tree. And then like it could end this way, it could end this way, it could end this way, it could end this way. And we're like, okay, well, that's the onboarding process. And then we ran that, realized that in the web example, there were even more permutations than what we had tried to document. So we couldn't even start optimizing there because there were continuing to be more and more variables. So that was another clue. And we did try to optimize at each stage, like try to mitigate for this, try to mitigate for that. But it was like whack-a-mole, We would hit one thing down, we'd ratchet tight one variable, and then there would be these 3 new things. So this is...
What kind of, sorry to interrupt you, what kind of questions were you asking yourself and your team when you were working your way through these two kind of scenarios?
That was directly out of our postmortem questionnaire. So for example, it would be, were all decision makers active and engaged from the gate? Were there decision makers that came in late in the game that threw wrenches into our process? Were we above? Were we below budget? And if so, what was the tone of conversation when budget increases needed to be discussed? Did we? And then those kind of follow-up questions were: did we just kind of bite the bullet and finish the project without profit, or did we stand our ground and say we can't continue? We know we misestimated, but we need to have another conversation before we can proceed. There would be other things like. Was there good quality control internally before we delivered to the client, or was it going from designer to client instead of designer, project manager, account executive, then client? So those were, all of these things are in our little postmortem document that we were able to ask ourselves after the process. And then we would kind of like put that into our onboard and then see if it worked, and then do another postmortem after that as well.
And I've noticed this sort of stuff can really grow and run rampant because, for instance, my brother is a software developer and works for a large, medium-sized company that does software development. And when he describes projects to me sometimes and how much unnecessary back and forth, miscommunications with a client who didn't provide all of the necessary stuff when they started coding out part of the software, 40, 50, 60% of the project is just money that really was just thrown in a trash can and lit on fire. It's disturbing to me as he tells me these horror stories. But if it's okay with you guys, I want to transition a little bit on this. I feel like myself and most people really love quick wins, like instant gratification, quick wins. Are there places where you find that some of these organization practices that you do could be applied to our audience or ourselves very quickly?
Yeah.
I don't know what that'd be, but
no, I love it, like life hacks, whereas like here's 5, quick tweaks which tend to work for most creative agencies or freelancers.
Email comes to mind, but there's so many other just basic areas. Do you feel like where people make common mistakes that could be make their lives better?
Yeah, I mean, I would. The first thing that because what we do a lot of is we offer Trello consulting. So we do like 30-minute free sessions for like people that want to figure out if their workflow is like efficient or not. And mitigating communication is kind of the thing that we start with. So eliminating unnecessary meetings is a quick win. That's an amazing, amazing quick win, because what you can do immediately is every hour that you don't talk on the phone unnecessarily or with people is another hour of work. And that's really, really easy to measure. So that's kind of a nice little quick win. Also, and this is just another thing for your to-do list, Dustin, but when I first heard about postmortems, I got really excited and I wanted to institute.
Can I rewind you real quick?
Yeah. Go ahead.
When you said eliminating meetings, you said, and that's really easy to measure. How do you measure that easily?
That's a great question. I'm sorry. We track time. So one step before trying to mitigate anything or trying to optimize is institute measurements and tools that are actually tracking what's happening. And you'd be surprised the easiness with the tools that are out there right now just to do something like time tracking. So it's a kind of a dirty topic because lots of people don't want to measure that stuff. But that's a quick win, and that's where I'd have everybody start, is somehow figure out a method of time tracking that works for you.
What would be your go-to tool for that?
So we use Toggle, Toggl. There's also Harvest, and there's also a lot of online invoicing software that comes with built-in time tracking. And the two ways that people tend to sway one or the other is time tracking live, like running the clock, stopping it when you're switching tasks and starting it when you're in a new task, or just very generally at the end of the day, blocking out the tasks that you did. 10 to 12, I was doing this. 12 to 1, I was doing this. And the reason I mention conference calls is that they're a big enough, chunky enough task to be hard to forget about during a day. So if you're just measuring, if you don't track anything but your conference calls, then that's a good place to start. And then you can really actually start seeing it drop over the weeks. So yeah, that's a nice little quick shortcut.
Just I guess before we jump into like the second shortcut, I talked about this in my content recently in terms of a lot of this stuff being fantastic on paper and in principle, and in execution playing out different. So one example is a great process improvement can be halving meeting times for necessary meetings, right? On paper, that's a great idea. But what everyone puts out on social media and so on is like half your meeting times and you get twice as much stuff done. But the reality is actually if you half your meeting times and have twice the amount of meetings in the same time, you get twice as tired because you're cramming it in. You kind of get burnt out quicker. So rather than doing like 10 meetings in 10 hours, if you try and do 20 meetings in 10 hours, you won't be able to, but you might be able to do 12 meetings in 6 hours. You know what I mean? If you're going from like 60 minutes a meeting to 30 minutes a meeting. And it's those kind of nuances which I feel are often overlooked. Just the actual humanity of like, well, you know what? We're not robots. So is there a kind of ceiling, I guess I'm asking, where you're like tweaking and refining and improving process and efficiency over and over and over again, but you can't do that forever. Otherwise you become perfectly efficient.
Right. So that thought is essentially the fundamental of this, because what happens with a lot of these life hacker, productivity junkie kinds of people is they are optimizing for optimization's sake. So not only just optimizing so that you can fit more in your day, but rewind all the way and get really, really clear on why are we trying to optimize our process? Why are we trying to break the box even? Why are we trying to get organized? Because the truth is, let's not assume that this conversation is rooted in disorganization is bad, organization is good, productivity is good, laziness and free time is bad, because that's just not true. So everybody's business, everybody's personal entrepreneurial endeavors, their passion projects, they'll all have different rules. So for example, my hobbies, I could definitely be more effective and efficient with my hobbies, but I'm not going to track time, how many music tracks I make, right? I could make 10 more if I wanted to, but is that actually going to add to my happiness? And for me, it usually comes down to like my grand vision for my lifestyle. And I'm blessed to be able to actually kind of ask myself those questions, being an entrepreneur that's interested in self-awareness and self-actualization.
Yeah, isn't introspection a first world problem?
Right. It's but I mean, it's still serious, right? You know, Maslow's peak, life or death, man. You know, so but I will. You know, you got to be really aware of that, because the truth is this will be different for maybe some of your listeners who are working inside of agencies where your job is to optimize so that you can be more productive, because that is the next step. Then yes, you know, trying to figure out how many more meetings you can fit in and optimize the effectiveness of your meetings might be your goal. But for me, I usually, and this is a great example, I usually have my daily phone call with my partner around lunchtime. And so what happens is I either have an hour conference call and a half-hour lunch, or a half-hour call and an hour lunch. And for me, that's the difference between a good day and a bad day, you know? So what other things you can put into the saved time is a really important consideration. We could just go down that rabbit hole for ages. But your point is really great, Tom, which is that, and Chase Reeves loves to talk about work for work's sake, right? And organization, doing work about work and organizing to be organized it's not the point. The point is there's probably, or there ought to be, a layer deeper of goal. And if you're not aware of that, maybe that's where you start. Don't start trying to optimize yet. Get clear on some stuff like that first.
Yeah, I guess you're kind of saying, like with anything, there's a middle ground and a balance, because Lisa, I'm sure you'd benefit from being a bit more efficient in certain processes, but equally, if you became all about that, you wouldn't feel inspired, you wouldn't feel creative, and your output would suck.
No, terrible.
Right.
So you need a bit of both.
Right. You need a balance, yeah. And you also, you know, as creatives, well, again, I guess people who work for themselves are lucky in a way, to some extent, that you can sort of ebb and flow your productivity depending on your energy levels, you know, creatively. So it would be nice. I'm just, you know, I'm getting inspired listening to you, because it would be nice to really harness those moments that you are, you know, energy levels are high and you really want to like bang out work as much as you can, because, you know, you're like a creative bunny on
yeah. That's what I optimize for.
And there's the episode covered.
Yeah.
Aidan, we do original artwork for each episode, so crack bunny.
Some bunny ears.
He's going to be representing. Do you ever do this? I mean, it sounds like you live and breathe this stuff. Do you ever recommend for people that they just block it in? So it's like, I'm going to schedule one day a month to kind of do an audit of my efficiency. The rest of the month, I don't even think about it, but I know on that day, that's going to be my job.
Yes. And precisely the way it looks like for me, I have a time tracking process that I don't need to think about now after I've optimized it. So I don't think about that anymore, ever. We have a project management process that works that I don't ever think about ever. And we have projects that we do, and those are the only things that we come back to. So every quarter, we do an internal postmortem. And then with our clients, when we do small one-off projects and those finish, we do a very, very quick, short postmortem with them often. How do we do? Were we slow? Were we fast? Did you think we were going to deliver something prettier than what we delivered? But that's it, man. And we make sure that those phone calls, those postmortems every month don't go any more than an hour. And then every quarter, we block a whole day. Because what usually happens after you do a postmortem, and this is, you know, kind of tying into the blocking the whole day, the thing takes maybe 2 or 3 hours, right? But we want to be careful individually and in solitude, to me and my partner at least, to take a couple hours in the beginning of the day to consider the postmortem ourselves without outside of the conversation. Then we do it and fill out the worksheet that we have. And then we have a nice, long, free-flowing, totally unbridled conversation about all the inspiration that happened from this postmortem, because we don't want to just cut it short and then scribble the notes and never look at them again.
Yeah.
The insights from that are the diamonds that you've mined. So you want to be very careful to document those, to synthesize those, to discuss them so that they're burned in your memory, so that it's more likely that you're actually going to execute some of that stuff later. But then otherwise, we don't think about it. Yep.
When you talk about tracking metrics for things, well, I'm not going to make any assumptions about what you do, but are your metrics mostly internal? How much quicker did we do this? Or do your metrics include things like, like the classic thing is like, right, net promoter score, things like that? Like how do you determine what the most important metric is? It would be easy to say, oh, well, if we get this project done and make 20% more than we would on an average project, and we do it in 30% less time, that's great. But maybe the customer is, 50% is happy. So how do you determine what metrics are important to measure?
That's a really good question. And I've definitely, metrics have gotten the better of me, and I've gone down the wrong tubes many a time. And it's really simple now. And I don't know if this is advice, but this is just what I do. The most important metric is, how happy are my clients? And how little did I work? And usually that's right. And that's what I'm optimizing for right now. There's a little bit of a sad story. But I don't know if you guys relate to this, but having built a successful creative firm, I don't enjoy making movies and art as nearly as much as I used to. So all of my hobbies are very technical. And outside of the world of creativity. So in the beginning, I would never have even dreamed of trying to do less work. I was in love with the Friday nights, 2:00 in the morning. I haven't blinked for 3 hours because I've just been in the middle of a cut,
I'm with you. I definitely resent work when it takes too much time.
Right. But in the early days,
yep. Sounds about right.
I loved it. I could disappear into it and it would be beautiful. And I haven't had that in a long time. And I think it's very healthy to realize that it's evolved, and that's okay. I used to, there was a mourning period that I went through. But I'm on the other end of that, and I do optimize for as few hours as possible and as happy as possible for my clients, because there are other things that I enjoy doing that have no link to revenue, which is amazing. I've been able to do that for myself. So
I have to say, I love those. I mean, I'm writing them down. I feel like that could actually be a whole book. I mean, because those are like the two, to me, and correct us in the comments or on social media if you think it's not true. But how happy are my clients or whoever my end user is, and how little work did I have to do? I mean,
right.
That really, really condenses it. I feel like you did a good job of that.
It's good metrics.
I think maybe let me add one thing, and that would be. And it doesn't have to do with the work that I'm doing for the clients, but how fulfilled am I is really important still. I used to really tie that to how happy are my clients with the work that I've done, and is that same work fulfilling me? I don't link those two together anymore. You totally can. Absolutely. If you're still there, I'm jealous of you. Honestly.
Yes. How are you doing that? I mean,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. How are you still finding fulfillment without connecting that? That's
a great question. I guess I would be. It wouldn't be true if I said I don't get anything from it, but I don't demand it of my creative work anymore. So what's kind of interesting about the way I view my craft now is I'm more interested in honing it than I am at making sure that it feels like my passion. Because I have a lot of interests, I just got into some Dungeons and Dragons for the first time in my life.
Oh, really?
And, currently obsessed with that.
I feel exactly the same way. I feel like there's this, it's that whole classic metaphor of, fish swimming in water, not knowing they're swimming in water. We we live we grow up in a, capitalistic societies, and we kind of feel like, well, I'm supposed to really, really enjoy things that equate to money. And the reality is, I think, much more close to what you're saying, and that sometimes we just have to try to find ways to make ourselves happy doing the things that happen to make the money. But so many things we do don't equate to making money. I mean, I'm right now I'm loving playing Red Dead Redemption or whatever it's called. I mean, I guess I could get on to whatever the platforms are and do that, but that doesn't make me any money, and no one would watch me do it.
Yeah, Dustin, you got to get a Twitch account. You got to start charging for that, man. Like,
I think that ruins it, right? I mean, it really does. You got to have these things and be like, I don't care who sees. I'm okay with messing it up. My 1-year-old baby boy is going to turn it off sometimes and pretend to play with me. Whatever.
Yeah. And then also, but to your point too, Lisa, it's I don't suffer doing it, right? And that would I'm really, really scared of that. I hope that never happens. But the less pressure I put on creativity, the less likely I am to find myself suffering. Even though maybe I don't have the bliss that I once did during the honeymoon period of my craft finally like supporting me. I remember those days. It was amazing, finally realizing like I could charge whatever I wanted for art, essentially. People wanted it. That was beautiful. And now it has kind of matured a little bit. And now I'm in the world of where it sounds like Dustin is, where I am very careful of the things that I enjoy, that I almost like refuse to get the Twitch account set up, and I almost refuse to do that stuff. So yeah.
Ian, I think you were going to jump in. We had a comment earlier requesting more Ian on the podcast, and I think you've been like the quietest ever, but you always have such insightful questions.
It takes me a while to process what everything's going on. I suppose, I really agree, because like I never intended, the hobby of drawing letters to become the thing that I make my money from, and it's weird seeing that what was once my hobby is now my thing, and how I still really enjoy it, but there is that part of it where you can say, I don't want to draw another letter again. But I think there's a lot of pressure for people to, if they're passionate about something, turn it into a thing to make revenue. And I suppose it's hard. You don't know what it's going to be like until it happens, I suppose. So it's quite hard to, because I do a lot of stuff that if I was doing it full time, I probably would hate it if there was like money attached to it. Because what I found is sometimes as soon as the money is attached to it, it might be a certain project that I've got within my business. If it's off my own back and it raises some money, it's okay, because I've already done the creative and then the money comes. But if it's someone says, could you do this for me and here's some money, it's like the creativity just goes out the window. I've lost it. And it's like, oh no.
Right.
It creates
kills
that
the
carrot and
muse.
stick scenario that you have to live with then. And
yeah. And it's like, there's been times where I just can't think, because like an instance was like, my YouTube channel, which I've had since 2012, I finally got some sponsorship videos for it. Soon as they like said they want to sponsor a video, I was like, I don't know what video to make now. So,
right. Yeah.
and
it kills it.
It does.
I remember, just brought up this thought of mine is, William Burroughs. I'm not familiar a lot with his work. I just know he's a kind of prolific writer, I believe. And
Apple shooter.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I'm not super familiar. I just know he has a kind of a cool cult following. And I remember a quote he had said to, I believe, Patti Smith or something like that. And he said, if you just take care of your reputation and doing the things you really want to do, then that will eventually turn into currency. And I guess that just led me to think of that because of what you're saying, Ian.
Oh, look at that. He's got the book on hand. He's like the new Dustin. Dustin's normally the one bringing out the literature.
Yeah. Have you got like a top 5 books you could recommend or?
Ooh, yeah. I kind of gave you 2 already, actually.
Yeah. What were they again?
I presume the third is going to be The Life and Times of Aiden Fishbein, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
To be released. But, so, and there are one of them was life-changing. Both of them were life-changing. Start with Why by Simon Sinek. I have an intern right now, and I have assigned him that book. The next is that book, Rocket Fuel. I forgot who it's by, but it's by the EOS guys. They have a whole platform. I'm not involved in their platform. It's kind of like a coaching, entrepreneurial, like operating system coaching thing. But they give you so many. Their books are great, and they also have like a bunch of really good kind of forms that you can download for meetings and tracking. So yeah, check them out.
That's cool.
Let's see, another book. This is going to be a tough one. I still don't know how I feel about this book, but I had a fairly revelational experience with The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. I have no idea where I sit morally and ethically on her work, but I will tell you that in that book, the pursuit of craft, and this is, I think, a really important book for a creative person, if they can get past the fact that she's like a pretty hardcore capitalist, opinionated person, there's a lot to be said about what it means to be somebody who is firmly aware of their calling, and just does not sacrifice or compromise with creativity, regardless of the input from everybody in the world, which these days on social is very, very hard to get away from. So Fountainhead is a tough one. Then
I like that. That's really a wild card there.
Yeah,
I know it is for me too.
Yeah,
I almost didn't tell you, but yeah,
Don't worry if you don't have 5. By the way, I think 3's pretty cool. If you got
or
5,
or
Yeah.
5.
yeah. I mean,
I'm interested.
I'd say the Chamber of Secrets has some pretty good organizational tips in it. They work together as a unit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. So I mean, we took about 10 massive tangents there because this stuff is really interesting. Did you have any more of the quick wins that Dustin was asking about? Because I notepad at the ready here.
Yeah. So that first one was the meetings, and that's brilliant.
And it gets time tracking set up.
Sorry, just final thing on the time tracking, actually. You mentioned you have to hit stop and start. That, for me, sounds like it would be a pain. Is there nothing that just kind of does it automatically?
So Toggle has enough integrations on enough browsers where it will it's still start and stop, but it will integrate on tabs. It'll integrate in tasks and most project management systems. But it is a start and stop thing, or it's an end of the day logging situation.
And I was just looking at Toggle. It looks fantastic, and it's really hard without something that you'd actually start and stop, because, for instance, I use time. I can't remember it. It's like this old school one that's been around forever, but it doesn't know when you're really finishing a task. I mean, I might jump from Photoshop to social media to do social media posts. It doesn't know. Right. It doesn't know that's a project.
I guess I was thinking more like Moment on your phone, where it's like you spent half your day on Instagram. What's the matter with you, you fool? That kind of thing.
That's what I need.
Yeah.
No, that's the effect that we're hoping to create here is making you feel bad about being a fool and good about being responsible or achieving whatever goal you set out. A carrot and the stick, right?
I feel like this would be a really hard sales pitch for my team. So what's going to happen is we're going to become incredibly Orwellian, and we are going to spy on your time throughout the day and then point out your inefficiencies.
Little cameras at your computer watching you.
Yeah,
it's a tough one, and especially so. Let me add a little caveat if we're dealing with a team here, which is that it is one of the, like you said, Orwellian. It's something people don't want to have to do. So I don't really have any good recommendations for how to get a team to decide to do it themselves. But if there are ways to do that, then I would try that. I would definitely try this on yourself first. Before you mandate a team to do it, because it really is kind of like time tracking is a real cornerstone in company culture. We've noticed when we consult with other companies, and it really is hard to institute something like that without also bringing along an essence of we don't trust you. So, and that's way more harmful than the data that you're going to get from tracking their time.
Sure.
Yeah,
I get it. Sorry, I tangented once again. But yeah, in terms of quick hacks, yeah, like I say, notepad at the ready.
Yeah. So this is kind of in line with the happiness. Are we happy? Are the clients happy? Simplicity. We have a Jim Collins, actually, the business writer, has like a daily journaling practice. And it's just on a sliding scale from -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2 on how good the day went. And then he has just a real quick, he puts this in a spreadsheet. And then he just jots a couple of things that happened the day, not even a paragraph, maybe a sentence or two. And this can be done with projects, or this can be done with clients as well, or internally about your work tasks, not just your day. And then what's really cool about this is that over a considerable amount of time, you can filter the +2 awesome days, and you can read the notes and see if you can find any consistencies there, right? So that's kind of an interesting one. I haven't had enough data there to tell you if it's working, but I still think the idea is really cool. So there you go.
I know. I've written down, if there's an app that does that, I would love to do that with our team. I think they do that on public transport here and that kind of thing. It's like you can press the smiley face or the straight, straight mouth face or the sad face. And I'd love to do that with the team and allow like anonymous notes or something and be able to just see trends over time.
Exactly. And then that gives you real tangible things to try to test to make people happy, right? Mm-hmm. So with a client, it's a good little survey. And the simpler the better, no more than 5 options I would recommend. But yeah, no, it's and it's also kind of like when there are realizations, and I've only had like a couple, it's like, it's stuff like going to the gym every day. It's like, oh, every single one of my +2 days had a component of exercise. Big surprise, but it's there. I'm looking at it. It's hard to ignore, and it helps reinforce continued behavior as well.
Aiden, would it be safe to say that because I noticed at first when you first started talking, I felt out of my depth. As soon as you said postmortem, I started to get uncomfortable because I started to think about how complicated this sounded like it could get. But it sounds like now we've talked more. Would you agree that simple metrics are often better or can go a long way to improving things? Because complicated things I tend to avoid. And I just, like when you just talk about 3 options, hey, was this good or bad? Binary or whatever. Can that be, do you feel very effective, or do you feel like you really need to get into the minutia of this?
Well, I would say 2 things. I would say simple metrics are definitely amazing. I would also say that the only way to get meaningful, complex metrics is to get good at the simple stuff first. So either way, start with the simple stuff, and also, and then I would just add, don't feel obligated to make it any more complex if it's working. So be very aware if simple stuff is working, because gosh, that's amazing. Only try and optimize if it's not working.
Mm-hmm. Right. I know we've done some surveys with customers and that kind of thing, and we put out the survey and get a bunch of people fill it out, and then we'll look at the data and just go, that told us absolutely nothing. Right. It'll be like, how happy are you? And then it'll be like, they said that happy, and it's like, great, what now? I don't know. And it's just, you know what I mean? It's just nice data to have. It's like, okay, that's interesting.
Right.
But now what?
Yeah, exactly.
That's not really a question. That's just me moaning.
Right.
I guess alongside what Dustin was just saying, I worry about process bloat. And that's not like, IBS or something like that. But
well,
although it could be.
Yeah, it really could be. In terms of that, we've implemented a couple of things where it's like, if we get that out of our heads and into a spreadsheet there, that's going to help. And then we're going to have like this workflow over there and this process there. And before you know it, you've just got like all these endless processes and worksheets that no one ever wants to look at. Mm-hmm. And it makes you feel more stressed than when you were bouncing around in your head.
Yeah. And this goes back to why it's good to have both people. Because I think we were starting the conversation mostly identifying with everybody on this call being visionaries, identifying with as creative visionaries.
I like how that sounds, Aidan.
I know, it's amazing. It sounds way better than integrator. I've gone through a lot of therapy to own that title.
I don't know. I could see like Arnold Schwarzenegger playing that. It's the integrator. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, you made me feel better. I've been remasculated. But this is why. So process bloat is really the problem, right? Processes are means to an end. They are not the end. We already talked about this. But most companies that are successful are run by visionaries for a reason. There's always a push and pull between the visionary and the integrator. The integrator is making the visionary more organized, and the visionary is making sure that the integrator doesn't get lost in the weeds of that minutia, right? So when you've got your, doesn't I forget the name of whoever was helping you with that analytical skill set? Who was that?
Suzanne. So do you ever say, Suzanne, that's a great idea, but it's just too complex right now. We don't need that level of detail. Yeah.
And then she sometimes probably will say like, hey, we need at least some level of detail and some organization. And that push and pull, if it's a healthy relationship, it usually ends up in the balance, right? Mm-hmm. Where, things are getting done. They are creative. The needle is being moved by the visionary, and the tasks are getting done because the process is working.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's true.
We don't like the bloat.
I wish we could.
I know,
be
you're
both.
just making me want to hire someone now.
I know.
Just to be like...
but I wish I could be both.
Well, you can. There's we just laid out like all these things that you can do to develop that part of you. And if
I try.
Right.
I really
no,
try.
and so there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing bad about that. But mathematically speaking, you will get a compounding effect on being freed up to play to your strengths. Then you will reducing your weaknesses. So that's, that's not an argument to not work on yourself, but it is, if you have the luxury and you have the opportunity to get somebody to tackle the stuff that you're not naturally skilled at, so you can focus on the stuff that you are naturally skilled at. It's a pretty simple, obvious solution there.
Can you say that again? Because that's a great quote. What was it? About your strengths and your weaknesses?
Are you gonna letter that for Instagram?
Maybe.
Ooh, exciting. So there's a compounding effect when you play to your strengths versus mitigating your weaknesses.
Oh, so eloquent.
I don't even know how to spell it.
I like it.
It's not this is old wisdom, don't give me too much credit. My tongue may be silver, but the ideas are not mine. It is, if you have the luxury of hiring somebody that plays to their strengths, by removing the responsibility of the analytical stuff and allowing you to play to your strengths, giving you free time to do that, then that's good. That was way worse than the first time. Damn.
Well, I got it down. It was fantastic.
Yeah,
I think we're recording this, right?
I think, too, to add on to Lisa's comment about it, is to try to be both is very, I almost feel like it's not within, for instance, my nature. Suzanne, who I work with, she gets a tremendous amount of satisfaction out of just seeing something put into order, seeing something done correctly. I get no satisfaction. The dopamine doesn't shoot off. I don't feel like I have any control over the dopamine being released into my body as those things are accomplished. She does. Mm-hmm. I get excited about the idea of, if we do this, then we can make this big thing happen. That's exciting. Mm-hmm. And it truly is fighting against yourself, because you're like, I just did this organizing task and I feel empty inside and I don't care.
Right. It's like the difference between the introvert and the extrovert. You can be a socialite, outgoing person as an introvert, but the difference is, do you get recharged by social activity? And if you do, then you're probably an extrovert, right? And that helps you be more social. But if you're an introvert, that exhausts you. So the same thing applies with like an analytical person, a creative person, I think. Analytical people, if they're forced to be creative, they get drained and they spend energy, and sometimes they have the energy to spend. But when they do the organizational stuff, it charges them up, and vice versa with the creative person.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And also, Lisa, I'm sorry, just one thing. It's possible you're both. there is a small subsect of the population that is split-brained, so...
I think I have a little bit of both. Well, I actually have a little bit of the analytical and obviously more of the creative. And I feel bad for the analytical side because that poor little bunny gets
Aiden, how's this for context? Lisa effectively draws illustrated bunnies for a living and is incredibly successful at it. And that makes me happy that that's possible in the world we live in.
Like, how many people make very healthy livings drawing bunnies? It's got to be like 0.0001% of the population. It's crazy.
Well, it's because nobody believed that they could, and Lisa, you did, and therefore you win. Yeah.
But Lisa, do you find you hate bunnies ever?
No. I'm always trying to find ways to kind of reinvent them.
You don't have like bunnies in your backyard in a cage and every so often you just go snap a neck or something?
Yeah.
What? No, Justin,
you're a terrible human being.
I'm saying Lisa does that. I would never do that.
I'm a bit worried about what is in your backyard now.
Yeah, just a grave of dust and despair. Wow.
Pet cemetery.
Dust bunnies.
Okay, on that completely horrifying note, I'm going to say, Aidan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah,
I knew that you were a lovely guy, but having you on and being able to chat for an elongated period of time, I like you even more than before we started. I have to say,
my job is finished here, and I can return to my home planet.
I really appreciate you joining us and like sharing so much value. I've taken a bunch of notes. I feel genuinely, I feel really inspired. I'm going to sit the team down over the next week and try and get more organized. If we start banging our head on various walls, I may even give you a call.
Please do.
If you guys help with this stuff, because I can tell how passionate you are about it. But where can the dear listeners, find you online?
Yeah, I think I'm building a Twitter following right now. So you can get at me at Mega Fishbein, Fishbein, Mega Fishbein.
Best handle ever.
Right, and please, I've been re-exploring some of the more philosophical aspects of like the process, right? So you guys know that I have process, but I love the philosophy. My personal blog, megafishbein.com, is getting a little bit more attention from me right now. Or you can just go to vitals.agency. I write there. It's a little bit more down to earth and design and branding focused. So, and then finally, I was honored tremendously to be brought on as a content producer for the Fizzle Show. So if you haven't heard of the Fizzle Show, Tom Ross was a recent guest on there. We talked about how he almost blew up his life. Amazing episode. But it's just a podcasting community for creative entrepreneurs trying to build their thing without blowing their lives up. So all those places, and probably Instagram, but who knows?
Awesome. Well, everyone be sure to go and check out Aidan's site. I actually didn't know about megafishbein.com, so I'm on it now. And I'm already liking what I see. It looks like some really cool content. So everyone go show Aidan some love. Let's give it up for Aidan, guys. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks so much, guys. Thank you.
Aidan.
Cool. Let's chat soon. But thanks again. And to everyone who tuned in, I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know on social. And we will see you next time. Bye from us. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode. As always, you can find full show notes over at honestdesigners.com or find us over on iTunes and now Spotify by searching for The Honest Designers Show. And remember, we're now on social media too, if you search for Honest Designers. If today's episode helped you, then it would mean the world to us if you took just a moment to leave us a quick review over on iTunes, as this is one of the best ways for other designers to discover the show. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you next week right here on The Honest Designers Show.